Down on the ground, hands on your head. Now, that was the first thing he heard standing on his own porch, holding the leash of his service dog. No warning, no chance to speak, just a taser and chaos. They had the wrong house, but 6 minutes later the National Guard arrived. And what happened next? No one on that street would ever forget. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Frank Delaney's house sat quietly at the edge of a cul-de-sac in Madison Heights, Virginia. It was a simple place. White siding, a screened-in porch, two rocking chairs that had seen better decades. The front yard was always trimmed neat. The flag out front changed for every holiday. Memorial Day, Veterans Day, 4th of July, never forgotten. Frank was 68, a retired master sergeant in the United States Army, 3 tours, 2 wounds. One lifetime of service that never quite let go of him. Inside the house, the past lived quietly. A folded flag in a triangular case sat above the fireplace. A few photographs faded, but proud lined the mantel. Frank in uniform, a much younger man. Frank and his late wife, smiling under a maple tree. Frank with a newborn in his arms, now grown, now gone, off to a different kind of war called everyday life. He didn't talk much, didn't go out much, but the neighbors all knew him, Mr. Delaney, they'd say, passing by on morning walks. "How's Major doing today, Major?" The dog, a golden retriever with smart eyes and a calm soul, a service dog, trained for PTSD. He didn't bark much unless Frank was hurting in his sleep. Then he barked like his life depended on it, because it did. Frank would say Major saved his life, more than once. On that Tuesday morning, the sun rose slow and quiet, spreading warm light over the wet lawn. Frank had just finished his coffee. Black, no sugar, same cup every day. He clipped the leash onto Major's harness and grabbed his ball cap from the hook by the door. "All right, partner," he said softly, voice rough from age and memory. "Let's go stretch our legs." Major wagged once. That was all he needed. Frank opened the front door, and the world shattered. "Drop the weapon. Get on the ground now." The voice hit him like a shockwave, loud, panicked, close. Frank blinked. 5, no, 6 men, dressed in black, rifles raised, helmets, armor, lasers, yelling. What weapon? Frank stepped forward, his hand still resting gently on Major's collar. "Wait a second," he began. The red dot landed square on his chest. Taser, taser. The sound cracked before the pain. His body arched. Electricity coursed through his chest like lightning through a dry tree. His knees buckled. The leash slipped from his hand. Major barked. Loud, protective, fierce. Another voice, this one sharper. Younger, screamed. "Dog's aggressive." "Contain the animal." Frank hit the porch with a thud, cheek against the cool concrete. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could barely see. Major circled him, barking wild now, not to attack but to protect, to shield. A boot crashed near Frank's shoulder. Shouts flew overhead. Orders, confusion. None of it made sense. His home, his porch, his tongue, and yet it felt like a war zone. His heart pounded, erratic, terrified, not just of the pain but of what they might do to Major. He tried to speak, to explain, to call out, but all that came out was a hoarse gasp. This is my house." They didn't hear him, they didn't want to. And as Frank's eyes fluttered shut, his body still spasming on the ground, one thought pushed through the chaos. Not again. Not here. Not like this. The taser wires still clung to Frank's chest when they rolled him onto his side and cuffed his wrist behind his back. Subject secured, someone barked. Their voice had that clipped, adrenaline-tight rhythm of someone who had trained for chaos but never paused to ask if it belonged. Frank's head lolled, one eye swollen, breathing ragged. The sharp edges of the porch boards dug into his ribs. His muscles still twitched. His hands tingled. But the pain had already begun to fade into something worse, disbelief. They were in his house now. He could hear them, boots on tile, Furniture crashing, drawers flung open, clear living rooms clear. Check the basement door on the left go. The front door hung wide open, half off its hinge. Major, his dog, his lifeline had finally gone quiet, held firm by an officer who had just noticed the service vest under the fur. Wait, the officer muttered, kneeling. This dog's registered. But no one was listening. Not yet. Another crash. Something glass. Frank winced. From where he lay, he could just make out the garden he had tended all spring. Rows of tomatoes, green beans. He remembered planting them with shaking hands. Major by his side. He wanted to speak, to shout, but his voice came out low and dry, like gravel. My name is Frank Delaney. This is 121 Oak Street. This is my home. Silence. Then something shifted. A man in tactical gear stepped onto the porch, glancing down at Frank, then back at the wrinkled warrant in his hand. He looked up at the number carved into the porch beam, 121. Then his eyes slid next door, 123 Oak Street. Identical house, same style, same paint, just one number off. He paled. Captain, he called, we may have a problem. At that same moment, 20 miles away, a cell phone buzzed on a weathered nightstand. A hand reached for it, rough, calloused. Sleep vanished in an instant. Hello, sir. It's McCabe. It's Frank. They got him. The line went quiet. Say that again. The voice said low, deadly calm. They hit the wrong house, sir. I just got the alert. Local SWAT breached his home. No warrant for that address. They tasered him. A pause, then, how long ago? About 10 minutes. Sir, the man didn't hesitate. Activate the standby team. I want wheels rolling in 3. Patch me through to National Guard Command. He ended the call, already reaching for his uniform. 6 minutes later, the rumble started. Not sirens, not choppers. Something deeper, heavier. Frank's neighbors looked up from their kitchens and lawns as 3 olive-drab Humvees rolled into the cul-de-sac, followed by a troop transport. Tires spitting gravel, windows dark. The convoy didn't slow, it deployed. Soldiers disembarked with surgical precision, forming a perimeter around both houses, Frank's and the real target next door. No words, no panic, just command. From the lead vehicle, a tall man stepped down. His boots hit the pavement like a gavel. Major General Charles Monroe, decorated, respected, feared by some, and once led by a younger Sergeant Frank Delaney, who had pulled him from a burning APC under enemy fire. He hadn't seen Frank in years, but he had never forgotten him. And when he'd gotten the call, he diverted his entire training exercise and came himself. Because some debts aren't written on paper. Frank still lay on the porch, hands cuffed, house trashed, Major curled at his side now, subdued but watchful. The SWAT captain, flushed and stammering, was trying to make sense of the new arrival. General Monroe, sir, we didn't know you were, this is a joint operation. No, Monroe said without raising his voice. This is a mistake. He knelt beside Frank, eyes sweeping over the bruises, the burns where the taser had struck. Frank, he said gently, it's Charles, can you hear me? Frank blinked. Recognition flickered. Charlie Monroe let out a tight breath. Yeah, I'm here, old friend. Frank's mouth twitched in something like a smile. Guess I missed the parade. Monroe stood slowly, then turned to the SWAT captain. You assaulted a decorated master sergeant on his own property, he said, voice low, because you didn't verify a house number. The captain tried to speak, but Monroe raised a single finger. My men will secure the block. Your team will stand down. Now. But the warrant, the captain started. Monroe's gaze hardened. Your warrant says 123. You entered 121. You didn't just mess up a door. You violated a soldier's sanctuary. He looked to his XO. Get Delaney medical. Get his dog checked. And someone clean up this damn mess. Neighbors stood at their windows, watching the SWAT team retreat in silence. Watching the soldiers, Frank's soldiers, lift him gently from the ground. Watching Major, unharmed, walk beside his master again. And in that moment, they understood this wasn't just a mistake corrected, this was a line being drawn. A man they'd passed 100 times on the street had just been seen for who he really was, and someone had answered the call. Frank sat quietly in the back of the military medical transport, a thick wool blanket draped across his shoulders. His hands still trembled, not from injury, but from something harder to name. Major lay beside him on the floor, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in calm rhythm. A medic in uniform knelt next to the dog, gently inspecting the vest straps, checking paws, whispering soft praise as if speaking to a soldier. Frank watched the young man work, then turned his eyes toward the window. His house, his sanctuary, stood just beyond the glass. Windows shattered, front doors split at the frame. The American flag that once flew so proudly was crumpled in the dirt. It didn't look like home anymore. It looked like memory, like something stolen. Across the lawn, General Monroe paced with his phone pressed to his ear, voice low but firm. "No, Governor, I'm not asking. I'm telling you, we need full coordination. This isn't about one man. This is about all of them. Yes, I understand protocol. I'm asking you to override it." He listened, nodded once, then ended the call. He exhaled slowly, eyes still on the house, then turned and walked back to Frank. "You good?" Monroe asked, his voice softer now. Frank didn't answer right away. He rubbed his palms together slowly, the tremor fading just a little. Then, quietly, he asked, "Why?" Monroe paused. Why? What? Frank looked at him, eyes tired, voice like wind through gravel. "Why all of this? I was just standing on my porch." The question didn't come from confusion. It came from grief. Monroe knelt beside him again. His gaze wasn't the commanding stare of a general now. It was the steady, grounded look of a man speaking to his equal. "Because the system failed," Monroe said. "Because too many men like you come home and disappear into silence. Because if this happened to you, someone who served, someone I know, then how many others has it happened to?" With no one watching, Frank looked down. "They didn't see me," he murmured. "Not as a man, not even as a name. Just a threat. And that," Monroe said firmly, "ends today." By late afternoon, the SWAT team had been pulled from duty. The entire operation had been suspended pending investigation. Captain Owens, red-faced, quiet, now handed over his badge and sidearm. The local police chief held a press conference on the edge of the cul-de-sac, flanked by state officials and Monroe himself. "We apologize to Mr. Frank Delaney," the chief read aloud, voice shaky beneath the cameras. "There was a failure in communication, verification, and judgment. A man who served this country with honor was treated as less than a citizen. And for that, we offer not just our apology but our accountability." Frank didn't speak during the press event. He didn't need to. He sat on his porch, arm resting on Major's back, watching the world turn its eyes finally toward the truth, and the guard stayed. All day. At first, the neighbors thought they were guarding the property. But as the sun rose higher and the drills were postponed, it became clear they weren't just protecting, they were restoring. The second Humvee opened like a toolbox. Soldiers unloaded plywood, nails, power tools, even fresh paint. Monroe's engineers' kids, really been on, no older than Frank's grandsons, stepped up one by one, already hammering a temporary frame into the busted door. One soldier set a ladder against the porch and began replacing shattered glass panes. Another, smiling under a helmet too big for his ears, nodded to Frank as he laid out shingles for a new patch on the roof. "This okay, sir?" he asked. Frank blinked, then gave a slow nod. "Better than okay," he said. "It's the first time I've heard 'sir' said like it still means something." The soldier smiled and kept working. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but slowly, piece by piece, the house began to look like home again. The front door was replaced, the railing was mended, the tattered flag was folded with care, then raised again with quiet reverence. Frank watched it all, his fingers resting in Major's fur. He didn't speak often, but every once in a while, He'd nod to a passing guard or offer a single word of thanks. That was enough. The message was clear. You see me now. By sundown, the work was nearly done. One last soldier approached with a clipboard. Sir, we're leaving a crew overnight, just in case you need anything. Generator's been checked. Water's clean. Fence sensors been upgraded. Frank blinked. You replaced my fence sensors, the kid shrugged. You served. We noticed. Behind them, General Monroe walked toward the porch with something in his hands. A small wooden plaque. Burned into the surface were 4 words, no more silent fronts. He set it beside the mailbox, then looked Frank in the eye. We'll be back, Monroe said. Not for cleanup, just for coffee. You don't get forgotten again. Frank didn't speak. He just reached out his hand, and the general took it. Firm, quiet, final. The next morning, Frank woke to something he hadn't heard in days. Silence. No boots stomping, no radios, no hammering on wood, just birdsong and the low hum of wind through pine. He sat on the edge of his bed, shoulders stiff, but steady. Major stretched beside him, tail thumping lightly against the floor. Outside, the porch light still glowed faintly. The door had been repaired, the window sealed, and the old welcome mat burned and torn just days before was clean and back in its place. Frank walked to the window. The flag was up again, straight, proud. Catching the first gold rays of morning, this time, no holiday demanded it. Just a memory, just a man, finally seen. By noon, the story had gone viral. Not because Frank asked for it, but because someone else had quietly submitted a photograph of Chef, a single-eyed, powerful image of a battered house being rebuilt by uniformed soldiers, while an old man sat with his hand resting on the back of a golden retriever. The caption was simple: when a hero is wronged, the right ones show up. Local news stations arrived first, then regional networks. By the end of the day, national outlets were calling General Monroe's office, asking for comment. Frank didn't answer any interviews, but he did answer the front door, almost constantly. Neighbors showed up one by one, arms full, a casserole dish, a loaf of bread, fresh flowers, a bag of dog treats, even a stack of firewood, cut and stacked neatly near the back fence. Some stayed to talk. Some just stood silently, eyes glassy with emotion, and said, "I'm sorry, and thank you." Frank nodded to each one. Some he remembered, some he didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was they came. 3 days later, an official envelope arrived, stamped with the seal of the governor's office. Inside, a formal apology, a signed commitment to a statewide audit of tactical warrant procedures. And a second letter, this one on Department of Defense letterhead, acknowledging gross misidentification, operational oversight, and moral failure in the treatment of retired Master Sergeant Frank Delaney. The letter offered restitution. Frank stared at the dollar amount printed at the bottom. He folded the paper once, then twice, then quietly said to Monroe, who had stopped by for coffee that morning, "Give it to the dogs." Charles blinked. Sorry, Frank handed him the letter. "I don't want a dime. Use it to fund more training for PTSD service dogs. There are other soldiers out there, walking alone through worse." Monroe smiled, then nodded. "Yes, sir." A week later, they held the ceremony, not in a government building, not under marble columns or behind polished podiums, but right there in Frank's front yard. It was small, unassuming, the way Frank liked things. A single folding chair sat near the porch. Frank didn't use it. He stood beside Major, back straight, eyes steady. Monroe stood before him, dressed in full uniform. In his hands, a shadow box. Inside it, a bronze medallion inscribed with 7 simple words, "For quiet valor in the face of silence." Monroe cleared his throat. "I've pinned medals on warriors in combat zones," he said quietly, "but never one quite like this." He turned to Frank. "You stood when you could have folded. You stayed when no one saw you. And when the system forgot, you reminded us what strength really looks like." Frank said nothing, Monroe stepped forward and placed the medallion gently into his hands. And then, without order, every soldier in attendance saluted, not because they had to, but because he had earned it, across the lawn. Frank's neighbors stood in quiet rows, mothers holding children, elderly veterans in faded jackets, high schoolers with unsure eyes now filled with something steadier. Even the mailman stood still, cap over his heart. As Frank turned toward them, Monroe's voice carried across the breeze. "We didn't come here today to apologize." He paused. "We came here to stand beside the man who once stood for us." Frank looked down at Major, then out at the people gathered. No words, no speeches. He simply stepped onto the porch, raised one hand, and touched the edge of the flagpole. The stars and stripes waved gently overhead, not because it was Memorial Day, not because it was protocol, but because one man had been wronged, and then remembered, and now, finally, seen. And for the first time in a long time, the town of Madison Heights understood something simple, something sacred. Quiet valor is still valor, and when the right people remember, the flag still flies. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.